question we're often asked in our weekly campfire mentoring sessions is, how do I spot the potential to add value to a property? Today, we will give you the top 6 things to look for, what costs a lot of money but doesn't add any value, and what to avoid at all costs.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're talking about the top 6 things to look for when assessing the renovation potential of a property now, or the potential of a property to renovate perhaps. Now, behind Megan in the video is something that I hazard we probably wouldn't bother renovating.
I'm guessing that if an agent had this for sale, they'd say something like, bring your toolkit, renovator's dream.
Renovate or detonate.
Yes. That's right. So for those who can't see, this one's falling off its stumps. It's structurally unsound. The roof line's got a sag in it. Like, it's everything that we're going to talk about that you probably don't want to involve yourself in as a first home buyer.
One of my clients sent me a link only yesterday for something that looks very similar to that. And I'm like,
Wow.
You're not serious, are you? He wasn't. He was more horrified at the condition that a property could get into. Yeah.
Yeah, it is alarming.
So let's talk through, and I think, before we actually get into this, I think one of the most important things, and I learnt this with a building inspector that we interviewed, in fact, our original building inspector back, I think it was episode 6 or 9 or something like that. Yeah, very early on. And something he taught me early on in my career as a buyer's agent was that buildings start deteriorating the minute they're built. And so therefore, that's why maintenance is so important. And the one behind you, Megan, is clearly something that it shows that if you don't maintain a building,
off its stumps,
they deteriorate. So, all right.
Look, and look, I think the thing that we've got to, I guess, put out in front is that just looking for a renovator isn't what you should be doing. You should be always focusing on location as your starting point. So this is not one of our top 6 things, but you got to do this first. You got to get your location right. You've got to work out where you want to buy, and what are things worth in that area, and does the location itself even warrant spending any money?
Yeah, because I'm actually judging industry awards at the moment, right? And I'm judging various awards, like I'm doing property managers and admin and operations, and I'm doing buyer's agents, I'm doing sales agents. And there was one particular entrant for award was showing examples of properties they're buying in outer regional locations for clients, and they're fibro shitters basically. And their strategy is to buy fibro shitters, give them a tart up and make them into a dual occupancy. And so but they're buying really, and I'm like horrified at these shitters that they buy. And I think to myself, the location, and yes, you can get this income from them, but should you be investing capital into a location like that? So it is important that you need to be thinking, if you are going to be investing and buying a property and then adding further investment to it in an area, is it an area that you can see is up and coming? Because really renovating, particularly from a first home buyer's perspective, the question to ask is renovating the only way you can get into that market? Rather than thinking, I need to renovate to be able to make money, I would tip that on its head. And I'd be going, where do you want to live? Can you afford to buy something that's easier, i.e. doesn't need renovating? In which case, just go and do that, unless you're a builder, Because
well, that's a good point. Like, do you even have the skills to do this?
Well, and this is the thing that there is a bit of a belief out there amongst some do-it-yourselfers that the only way to make money in property is to add value and to renovate and improve. And yes, you can make money potentially, but we're going to get to what to look for in the actual building itself, because there's some really key things you need to look for here. But as a first-time buyer, I'd be just saying, if you can get into an area without needing to renovate, don't think you have to renovate. Don't think you have to, right? And like Megan just said, do you have the skills? It's really appropriate. You're thinking about, am I properly equipped to do this properly and to really build something or develop something here that is going to really add value and is going to be valuable in that marketplace as well. So, and it can be anywhere in the continuum, from a cosmetic upgrade, which is like paint and carpet.
Yeah.
Right up to the whole knock the back end off and put another story on it, right?
Raise it from the ground, as they do in Queensland, and put another story underneath, or in the southern states where it's maybe a brick base on concrete slab, put another story on top. They're big jobs. They're big jobs that can take 10, 12 months, need a huge amount of project management capability and a very good team of tradesmen.
And budget as well. But also, here's the thing, time. Because if you were going to live in it, cosmetic upgrades are great. You can actually live in it half the time. You can live without a kitchen while you put a new kitchen in. You can live without a bathroom even. I've known people.
Yes. I have a staff member at the moment who's living without a bathroom, and with 4 children. I can't fathom how he's doing it.
I was talking to my friend's sister, and she's an architect, and she said, well, when my kids were little, they live in Melbourne, they live in St Kilda. We were renovating. They went 3 years without I think it was a kitchen, but there was a period of time where they went without a bathroom as well. They went without hot water for years in Melbourne. The architects, very successful architects too. Let me tell you.
I just can't fathom that. I know that some people do the Wim Hof method and they do the ice baths and all that sort of stuff. But if my shower's not hot, I'm not having one.
No. Anyway, so we digress. So, that's a pretty extensive renovation. But so, when you do a cosmetic renovation, you can do that while you're living there, whereas you need to move out for a bigger renovation. So there's a lot of these considerations to think about.
Yeah.
So
Veronica, I think what we can share with people today is what we look at when we walk through a house and it's not, a finished, completed sort of product. So we're not looking to pick this thing to pieces. We're looking at, what potential does this property have? What could you do with it? And what would it take? So first and foremost, the thing that we look at is the bones of the property and whether it is structurally sound. The house behind me, for those who are watching, is not structurally sound, and I hazard to guess the bones are not great.
If it's wonky, it's falling off its stumps, it's probably not structurally sound. I think actually,
as with everything in property, that's not necessarily a hard and fast rule, because if you can replace a couple of stumps and even up the house, and there's not a huge cost in doing that, then that may be good potential to invest in. But if you've got to re-level the entire house, that could be a cost that doesn't actually provide any value add.
There's also, somebody told me many years ago, carry a marble round and you can see that the put on the floor and see it shit out the door, that it's not level. And in older houses, certainly in the areas that I buy, in my team buy in, we don't often see really level floors because, we're buying Victorian terraces and Edwardian cottages and workers' cottages and weatherboard homes and that have been around a long time.
A long time, yeah.
So, and they've had iterations over the years. They've been, potentially added on to and all the rest of it. Sometimes you have to live with wonky wall. I mean, I actually looked at a terrace. We didn't buy this. It was some years ago. and it was a terrace house. So it's in a row. I think it was 8 terraces, and it was about one of the middle ones.
Yeah.
But the whole row of terraces over the years had slightly skewed. And so when you walked in the front door and looked at the staircase, because the staircase was a typical Victorian terrace, you walk in the door and then there's a staircase on one side of the room, either it's ahead of you or on the other wall. This was ahead of you. So you walked in the front door and you sort of looked up and you could just see that the whole staircase was wonky.
Right.
It was wonky. Solid as, like it had fallen as far as it was going to fall, and it was basically propped up by the other,
Makes me think of a house of cards. If one goes, the rest are going to go.
Yeah, dominoes, but something stopped the domino completely falling over. But it was like, what? You couldn't fix it. I mean, to fix it, you just wouldn't bother. But it's wedged there. It's and it was the building inspector. We didn't buy it, but I spoke to somebody who did a building inspection on it, and it was it's actually fixed, firm. It's quite solid. It's just wonky.
Leaning tower, Pisa style. Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily get excited about buying something with an obviously wonky staircase, though, even if it wasn't going anywhere. So, I mean, I'd be looking at it, and that comes to the bones again, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is. And bones are something that, they're not necessarily easy to define, but you kind of get to know what you're looking at when you're looking at a property, and it's really about, how's the essence of the structure, if you like.
Solidity.
Yeah, that's right. So that's our number one. Our number one of our top 6 things to look for, that we look for when we're walking through a house, is the bones, or how structurally sound it is. And then we look at, well, is it well maintained versus have you got to fix someone else's neglect, wonky floors, water damage, damp, rot, all of this behind me if you're watching. So a well maintained, we call them grandma's house, you call them Nana's house.
Yeah.
That has got really good bones, it's structurally sound, but it just has got stuck in the 70s. Those can be potentially great cosmetic renovators.
They're my favourite. They're dated, right? But they're not decrepit. They're not derelict, And I can tell you, the house that I live in, right, when I bought that had been neglected. And it had some bones, but like the bones in my case was as a double-fronted freestanding house in an inner city location. It's really unusual to find that in my area, right? Really unusual. And it had a Greek yaya that had lived here for 50 odd years. And I was hearing stories from the neighbours the other day about how she used to go out with her walking frame and walk, the front and back. But like they'd done things, they'd ripped out every original feature. They'd ripped off the front veranda, the awning, the front veranda, awning, and so that led to water problems inside the house. You know what I mean? And then the knock-on effect of that, and it was built too close to the ground, and it was all this stuff. And I knew it had all this stuff, but I went for it because of the uniqueness and obviously back to the location. In my location, it's worthwhile investing in this type of property because it's got scarcity for other reasons, right? So it's worthwhile. But it had not been maintained, and I knew that, and I had to then fix and pay money on fixing things that I would have rather not have to fix. And I've got another property, it's an investment property, it's a house over in Alexandria in Sydney, and that was owned by a couple in the 80s, so they'd been there same sort of time when I bought that property, but they had fastidiously maintained it.
Yeah.
Fastidiously. The floors, so I ripped up their blue shagpole carpet, by the way, and I polished the floors. I ripped off the, beautiful white, was it blue striped satin wallpaper, painted the walls. So we did a cosmetic renovation on that because it was all in such good condition because it had been really, really well maintained. And it cost me a fraction to bring that up to speed that this one did. But when I first had to do a cosmetic on it to get to rent it out because it was in disgusting condition, it cost me a lot more money, and a lot of that was dead. We'll get into burning money that doesn't have value coming up. But so that's the difference between well-maintained versus fixing someone's neglect. And this is my third renovation, so I knew what I was in for.
I would hazard to guess that you had a lot more knowledge about what you were getting yourself into than a first home buyer taking on their first renovation.
Yeah.
One of my team is bought his first house. So he's a young buyer's agent that has worked with me for 3 years. He bought his first house at the end of last year, and it was definitely, good bones, layout was pretty good with some changes in an up and coming area where things were really changing. But even he said to me, and he was a builder before he came in to work with us, so he has a really good idea about what things take. He said to me, and it's just like I do one thing and then it uncovers another thing and then it uncovers another thing. And his lack of experience in that space has meant that it's been really quite stressful because he's trying to do it on his own. He's got some skills, he's got some background, but even that has been really quite stressful for him because it's not just as easy going, okay, I'm going to open up that doorway, put in a lintel to, keep the structure sound and oh, that's right. Yeah, now there's some asbestos I've got to get rid of. Oh, right. Yep. Now I've got to reframe that. Oh, yeah. Now, the roof lines don't match.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things to think about when you're doing renovations first time versus ninth time. And you pick up a lot along the way.
Now, one thing I would really add in terms of well-maintained versus fixing someone else's neglect is the roof. Because water is what creates so many problems in houses. And so I'm looking at the video behind you, Megan, and weirdly enough, that wonky falling down house behind you, it looks like, say, she got a decent roof on it.
It looks like it's the one thing that's been either kept up or replaced at some
what the
point
hell?
in the last
Anyway,
20 years.
Be that as it may, if the roof hasn't been maintained, if there are leaks that haven't been, unchecked, if the guttering hasn't been maintained, if there's holes in the gutters, if there's trees growing out of the gutters, if there's, that's something that I definitely look for because the damage that can happen over time through neglect, through water.
It's not just what you can see.
Yeah, is a real nightmare, and that creates all sorts of stuff behind the walls that you just really, until you start pulling it apart, you go, oh, so there's that, that then becomes it's a much bigger problem because I then discovered all this other stuff. So look for that. When you look for well-maintained, I'll be just saying, how's watertight does it feel? Because that's a good part of that.
Because the building inspection is going to be a big part of that as well. Now, our number 3 thing that we look for when we're going through properties and looking at potential is its orientation. And orientation is really, it's at its heart, it's the direction that it faces. But you've got to be really careful with marketing material and how the agent is selling the house because in the southern states, you don't want to really be facing a direction that's going to be really cold. So
you don't want a south-facing garden.
South-facing can be a little bit chilly. But if an agent says, perfect north-facing property, you've got to work out, is that the front of the property that's facing north or is it the back of the property that's facing north? Because you're probably not going to spend most of the time out the front. And similarly, in hotter climates, like up in Queensland, it's really tough to have a western-facing rear. I know I've lived in a house with a western-facing rear, and there's not a lot you can do. If it's elevated, there's not a lot you can do to shade that apart from putting blinds on, external blinds. So if it's north, northeast, that's your ideal rear orientation, but not the front orientation of the property. And it can have a big impact on your potential resale. It can have a big impact on your livability. It's one of the basics of property selection that we actually talk about. But when you're looking at adding value to a property, you need to differentiate between the property that has the south-facing rear in the southern states versus the north-facing rear in the southern states. What are those properties reselling for? Because there is actually quite a bit of difference in the price of them.
And also the one thing that you'd be looking at with orientation is, can you bring more light into the property? And so through a renovation. So that's something where you might be able to capitalize on an orientation. Or, but yeah, I don't love a south-facing garden. And I've had one, but not for many years. And it was,
sometimes that's a compromise that you make. But if you're looking to add value to a property and spend money on it, you really need to think about what your future buyer is and where the value is going to be best spent.
Yeah, and if you're looking at an attached home, because quite often, like in my area, for example, like semi-detached or an end of terrace or, maybe it's a duplex. And you think, okay, well, particularly if it faces east-west, as some of them do, that means that one of them's got windows on its northern side and the other one's got windows on its southern side. Well, I don't want the southern one. Like if that comes on the market, it's not going to be as good as the northern one, right? So there's things like that. So you need to be thinking, where can we capture northern light? Where can we avoid Western afternoon heat?
Yeah.
So there's all that sort of stuff, and it's important because can you mitigate it, and if you can, then maybe it's a way to add value to the property, and if you can't, some properties aren't worth renovating.
Yeah, it might be money poorly spent. All right, number 4 on what we look for when we go through a property and we're looking at its potential is the layout. It's really important. It needs to have functionality. It needs to have flow. And if it doesn't currently have that, can the renovations that you're looking at doing give it that functionality and flow?
Like, for example, are the bedrooms grouped together? Is the bathroom, assuming there's only one bathroom, the bathroom's close to the bedrooms? Is the living area close to the garden, or are you sort of going into, like in the 60s, the houses would be built, you walk in, there's a lounge room,
lounge
and then,
area,
there's a little tiny
area.
Yeah. There's a little tiny door out of the kitchen that goes to the garden. We don't live like that anymore. So does it work functionally for the way we live? Or can you reorient? Can you say, well, the lounge room can be turned into a bedroom, and I'm going to open up this wall there and blah, blah, blah. So there's things that can be worked within a floor plan potentially. So does that make sense? Can it be done? How easy is it? Because obviously the more you can retain in the floor plan, the less it's going to cost you to renovate.
Absolutely. And you're a big fan with apartments when people are looking at potentially adding value to apartments. You're a big fan of looking at that potential to use a laundry, if there's a laundry in the main floor area. Can that be turned into a second bathroom? And if it can, how does that functionally work and interact with the bedrooms? So, a laundry that's off the back of the kitchen, that's off the living areas, probably not a great place to put a bathroom. But if it was right next to the main bedroom and could be turned into an ensuite, there's potentially, you've got to look at your costs and body corporate approval and a whole lot of other stuff. But potentially that could really add value to a property as well as functionality.
100%. And in fact, the laundry sort of in the 1960s and 70s sort of apartments are usually quite big, and they've often got a water heater in them as well. So if there's ways if the building's, talking about upgrading their water heating, maybe they're going to go instantaneous or whatever it is. If there's ways to change that, then and also if the bedroom happens to be adjacent to laundry and the punch a hole through there. So there's ways that that potentially that floor plan will work for you. The other thing that I like in apartments is to open up kitchens into the living area and
houses as well.
Yeah, exactly.
That connection, that open plan living sort of feel.
Apartments is not always possible, you've got, because obviously depending on where you are in the apartment block and supporting the upper floors and the roof and stuff like that, you certainly need to get the appropriate
without
structural engineers and various
approvals as well.
Yeah. But certainly you can modernize places quite cost effectively in many ways, working with the existing layout. Just a little hint for me, don't forget that you lose your cupboard space if you actually take out a wall. So when you walk into one of these kitchens and you go, they've got the cupboards up the top and they've got cupboards down the bottom, the minute you take out a wall, you're going to lose all the cupboards that were on the top of that wall.
Yeah, so rework that kitchen.
Yeah, just a touch. Anyway, steal a little bit from that laundry you're turning into an ensuite. Steal a little bit as a pantry.
Look at us go. And honestly, when we look at a floor plan, Veronica and I, it's interesting. We both go, oh, you could. We've been sitting in campfire sometimes, and someone will show us a floor plan, and we'll go, oh, you could actually turn that into a bedroom, and then that could become an ensuite, and open that up, and
I'm going to add one caveat there though. Look at the roof. The roof structure, because you can look at it. I've looked at floor plans before, particularly for terrace houses, and you sort of look at the downstairs and you go, right, I could do this, could open out, I could work within that floor plan. Then you go there and realize that what you looked at as a laundry, I was assuming it was incorporated into the sort of kitchen area, and you look, it's really an outhouse. It's been tacked off. It's got a totally different, it's got a different ceiling height, it's got different roof.
Go down 2 steps and it's disconnected largely, and it's really just an iron roof over a couple of walls. Yeah.
Look good on paper, but not in reality. Yeah.
All right, let's look at number 5, the things that we look at. And this is a big one, particularly if you're looking to try and move a property from one price band to another price band by adding rooms or changing configuration. And that's making sure your proportions are appropriate. And this has two meanings. One is the actual sizes of the rooms. So making sure that you haven't got, a really small living area and 4 bedrooms, or that your bedrooms themselves haven't become too small because you've tried to fit too much into a small amount of space. But it also relates to having a proportionate number of bedrooms, bathrooms and living areas.
And outdoor space.
And outdoor space, yeah. So if it's a 4-bedroom house, it's likely that you want to be getting probably 2 bathrooms in there and hopefully 2 living spaces, because that's a larger family home. But if it's a 3-bedroom, then you might get away with a 1 bathroom or a 2-way bathroom, 1 living space and an outdoor area. So proportions in terms of size and number of the different attributes is really important.
And I think too that the room proportions, and what Megan was saying there is really important, because a lot of people seem to think, oh, the number of bedrooms is really how you work out the value of a property. But it's not true. I've seen people squeeze 4 tiny bedrooms into a renovation, and that house would have been worth more money if it was a cracker 3-bedder.
Yeah.
But instead they've turned it into a horrible 4-bedroom. So be really mindful that what the end, after configuration, that the proportions of the rooms are, nice. They
still
feel
functional.
nice. They don't feel mean, and all this. You got to be able to fit in bedrooms, fit queen size bed in it with 2 side tables, for argument's sake. Instead of, I went in one house, one of my team looked at this house, had been renovated, and actually to a quite high standard of finish. But it was a bit of a long, skinny house, and it should have been a 2-bedroom. It would have been a great 2-bedroom, but instead they squeezed 3 bedrooms in. 2 of those bedrooms were so skinny they could only fit a single bed.
Oh.
And you go, that just cuts
Such
you.
a shame. Yeah.
It means you're basically just selling to people who got preschoolers.
Or just a couple with 2 home offices, because you can't even make one of those into a spare bedroom with a double bed.
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah. And living spaces are a really important one. If you're developing a product, or you think your end buyer or your use is just for 2 people, then not really adding a lot of value by having 4 bedrooms. But if your living area is too small and you can't fit, a couch, a TV, some side tables, if you can't fit the seating in to the living area and the dining area that matches the number of bedrooms, then you're disproportionate in how you've done your configuration. So your living spaces have to be big enough for the number of people that you're kind of planning the house for.
Yeah, 100%. And it's common sense, but we just see people get it wrong so often. So that's why we say it.
And living areas where there's nowhere to put a TV except in front of a window, that's not great planning, and it is going to be picked up by future buyers and have an impact on saleability and in value.
Yeah, it's a classic. We're television, and it's sort of like we shouldn't be really basing all of our property decisions on where our television goes, but the fact is we pretty much all
that's
have
where
one.
we spend our downtime.
That's yes. And right, number 6. This is the biggie, right? After all of that, we've just gone through all these things we look for, and then we think, is it feasible?
Yeah. And feasibility is really about going, okay, what's this going to cost me to buy? What is it going to cost me to do these improvements, changes, renovations, reconfigurations, cosmetic upgrades, whatever the case may be? What is that total amount going to be? And is the property actually going to be worth at least that at the end? Right? So we're not talking about flipping houses. We're not talking about making profits. We're talking about a house that you're buying for potential to improve for your own livability, but making sure that you're not putting money in the wrong places, right? So it's not about flipping houses and making a profit. You want to make sure, though, what you're spending isn't going to exceed the end value. And to find out what that end value might be, you really have to have that. What does this look like? How many bedrooms, bathrooms, configuration, the layout, the outdoor areas, the orientation, all of the things that come into assessing what a property is worth, and have a look at what properties are around it in the area that have been renovated to that kind of similar standard, similar size, and what are they selling for?
Yep.
It's so you can't guess this stuff. You have to use the data that's out there.
you use our free mini course, which is the how to price a property, because that you can use that for when you're buying, but you use that to work out, well, what if I was to buy this and then spend X amount of dollars renovating it and turn it into that? What had those properties been selling for?
Yeah.
And so you just use the same process. And, it is really important too, because most people overestimate what they can achieve in a property and they underestimate how much it's going to cost them. And so this is your risk.
Overestimate the end value of it.
Yeah. And this is your risk. So you really got to be very mindful. And you know what? Even if it is worth a little bit less than the total cost, right? Even if, and you're going to live there for a long time, sometimes that's actually okay and that's fine to do as well. But you do have to think it through before you go and commit to it, because once you're committed to it, you're committed to it regardless of how much it costs and whether it's feasible, whether it stacks up or not. So it's important to think about this beforehand. And then let's move through some of the things that can burn a hell of a lot of money, but don't add value.
These are look, sometimes you've got to do these things, but don't think these are going to add value to any property that you purchase. Well, there's always an exception to the rule with property. So things that are going to cost a lot of money, re-stumping or leveling a property. Now, you wouldn't want to do a renovation without having done this first or making sure the property is level, because anything you do is going to be affected if you try and level it afterwards. So
you have to do it. We don't say don't do it because it doesn't add value. It's just that you got to suck it up and you just got to do it.
And certainly do it. If you're gonna do any level of renovation that costs some money, make sure that the foundations, that the structure is, the integrity of it, the basics of it are right before you add the pretty pieces and put some lipstick on it.
Because you don't, when you're looking at an ad for a renovated property, they don't have re-stumped as one of its, it's one of its
not a
features.
Selling point, is it?
They'll talk about, a beautiful new kitchen or landscape gardens or whatever. They're not going to go recently re-stumped.
Yeah, you think about when you look at an ad, you go, oh, it's been leveled. Do you know, if someone said in an ad it's been leveled, I go, why did it need leveling?
Well, but
what's wrong with the soil?
They're the things that we take for granted. No, the house should be level, right? So therefore, if you've got to make it level, all you're doing is basically bringing it up to our sort of base level standard. And then, look, another thing, I'll tell you, things that don't have value, things that I've had to spend money on, you've got to fix the damp in the walls.
Yeah.
Like I had to fix a lot of rising damp. Yes, sure, it makes it nicer, but at the end of the day, I'm basically
nobody walks in and says, gee, you've done a great job with that, getting rid of that damp, Veronica.
No. And you don't really want them knowing there was heaps of damp there in the first place, do you? So and also when I started excavating, so here's something that burns money but doesn't add value. If you have to excavate, Queensland, you don't worry about this so much because you're jacking that house up, right? Yeah. Whereas in New South Wales, a lot of times you have to excavate, particularly if we are going to put a slab down or whatever. But we excavate and there's lots and lots of rock, right? That's expensive. You got to suck it up. When I excavated this house, well, I didn't do it myself. When the builder excavated, he found no rock, which was actually equally expensive because then I had to put in something like 26 piers that were not factored into the cost.
The stability.
And no one's going to, I go, I've got 26 piers. That's not going in the features list of this house when I sell it.
Another thing that needs to be done both from a safety perspective and, because it's, when you're renovating, do things then, not later. Don't think about later, is rewiring.
Yeah.
Because a lot of properties, particularly older properties, are going to have very old wiring. If you've got any of that old Indian black wiring, that's incredibly dangerous and has to be removed. You might need to upgrade the meter box. You might need to upgrade the fuses, bring it up to comply with current standards. If you're putting in air conditioning, you need to potentially go to 3-phase. So upgrading the wiring, replacing the old wiring, getting it all upgraded, there's a lot of costs there. And that, again, is not necessarily something that people are going to go, ooh, you did some new wiring.
Yeah. Love that rendering.
But
and the wiring.
Important to do. Costly, but it doesn't add any value to the property. Roof replacement and repair. Now, this is an interesting one.
You could sort of argue maybe that it does add value because you can actually see the roof.
You can see it. Yeah.
So it's a big rusted tin roof. Then, maybe replacing that does have immediate value add. But generally speaking, like there's a lot of sagging roofs, a lot of cracked tiles, all that sort of stuff, and these are all maintenance and things that can be quite costly. But it's not immediately obvious to the eye. I think that's really what the theme of this list is. It's stuff that's so needs to be done. It's so important to be done, but it's not immediately obvious, and it's never going to make the features list. The new roof sometimes, but generally speaking, doesn't.
Yeah. But important because we talked about water ingress earlier and the damage that can cause. So having that solid roof, watertight, good guttering, downpipes that work and empty, these are all really important things to get right, but don't add a lot of value. And the final one on our list is asbestos. Now, this again could go either way because often when you're looking at a property, you do want to know, is there any asbestos here? So the removal of it can remove an objection, but doesn't necessarily add value.
Yep.
Not being there, but it's very costly. It's costly compared to, say, disposing of plasterboard or timber.
Yeah, 100%, because you've got to get specialists in to do it. And it's obviously there's a lot of safety issues there. Interestingly, I was at a building and pest inspection the other day for a client, and there was an old garage at the back, and I'd seen it on the weekend. I went, that's an asbestos bomb, that one. So I asked the inspector, I said, what would you recommend you do with that? Would you recommend basically getting the removalists in and taking it away and just recladding it? What would you recommend? Or even reclad over it? And he said, you know what? Because ultimately these people will renovate at some point. He said, I wouldn't do that. I would give it 3 really good thick coats of paint on the outside, and on the inside you can get this stuff, I don't know what it's called, but it's like a rubber stuff you can spray all over it and makes it basically means it's sealed. And I just went, I hadn't heard of that. I went, what a cool idea. So basically, so there's, even with asbestos, there are ways to safely deal with it upon getting expert advice. Don't take anything I say on this one.
No, and don't do it yourself.
Do not do it yourself.
This is not something you do yourself. Any plumbing, wiring, asbestos removal, structural.
Plumbing, legally you're not allowed to do plumbing yourself either.
Wiring, yep. It's got to be licensed.
You'd be an idiot to do any wiring yourself. Don't touch the asbestos.
So look, they're the things that when you're looking at the potential of a property, it's not just about how you're increasing value. You also have to look at sunk costs that are necessary, but not necessarily going to add value.
They're not the fun things to spend money on.
They're not the fun things, but they're important. Yeah. Now, danger zones. This is one that we added in that we thought we'd share with you. So these are things that you really need to think hard whether you want to go ahead with a property anyway. But if you're looking at spending money on something, danger zones are things where you can't fix it.
Yeah.
Like you can't overcome.
You can't renovate. You can't renovate away a main road.
You can't renovate. You can do double glazing. You can put curtains. You can put your living towards the back. You can, there's all, it's still there. It is still there. It's not going away. Future buyers are going to see it and it will impact price. So when you're looking at something that has that kind of objection that can't be overcome, you need to make sure that when you're doing that feasibility analysis, you're comparing apples with apples. Like, don't look at the value of something in a quiet residential street if what you're looking at potentially doing is on a main road. They're not comparable. The values, the end value is going to be very different.
100%. You got apples and apples. And so, also if there's a privacy issues, say it's overlooked by a big block of units, or even if you're you're in the hollow of a hill, like you're in the bottom where you've got lots and lots of trees around you, and it's nice to have trees around you, but you forever
no airflow, ventilation,
it's dank,
natural
dark,
light. And you might be able to say, I can put really good lights in and air conditioning. It doesn't fix the problem.
No,
the problem's still there.
Exactly. So just those unavoidable, what do you call it? Those unfixable problems.
Yeah. Danger zones. Be really, really careful about them. Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, just to recap, so the things that we look for, the top 6 things that we look for when we're walking through a house looking at its potential are, firstly, bones are structurally sound. It's well maintained, has good orientation, a practical, good flowing layout, or you can create one. good proportions, particularly after you've done any kind of improvements, and the feasibility stacks up. So what it's going to cost you all up is not in excess of what it will be worth at the end.
Very, very, very practical advice for you in this episode. Okay. Have you joined our Facebook group yet? You know, it's early days for this, I will confess. When you join, you're not going to find heaps and heaps and heaps of people in there, which is actually a good thing because it's called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia, and it's your opportunity to connect with us and ask us your questions. You'll get answers from us, which means, and I keep saying from us, which means that you can be sure you're not going to be led down the garden path by people who don't know what they're talking about.
Yes. That's right. And a quick note, you might think that we cover everything you need to know on these podcasts, but a word of warning, we don't. We just scratch the surface here. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you really need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order.
We keep the bloopers in here. And our first home buyer guide course only costs $990, and you get direct access to us to help guide you through your negotiations. And you can share the link. You can bring every week to us. We have what's called a campfire. You can share the link of any property that you're thinking of buying. We can help you work out whether it's A, B, C grade or no-go zone. And honestly, it is $990. I get that. You're saving money. You think that's a lot of money. But without our guidance, your probability of paying way more than $1,000 more than you need to is huge, okay? So if you don't know what you're doing, we encourage you to get the course and learn the process properly.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out Your First Home Buyer Guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you've found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.